Hello, this is Amin, and this is session 31 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this session, we will discuss about two more HTML helpers, BeginForm and RadioButtonFor. But before starting this session, we recommend watching a previous session which were related to HTML helpers, and then start this one because this is continuation of HTML helpers topic. We want to modify our form that we created in two previous sessions. This is the changes that I want to implement in this form that I have created in previous session, adding payment method to create cost record form. For this purpose, first I should create one entity for storing payment methods and its repository and also its interface. These are the classes and interfaces that I need for payment method, one class for entity payment method, and also one interface and one static repository. As we haven't started working with database, we still use a static repository and create one static object of payment method, list of payment method, and also I should register this repository and interface inside my startup class. We reviewed these topics, creating entity and properties, interface and repository, and register it in a startup class in a previous session, and just I copy these elements to my project. Let's flip to Visual Studio and first create payment method entity and its interface and repository, and then register it in a startup. This is the project that we have developed until this session together. And the first step that I should use is creating one model for payment method. I add a class and I call it payment method and copy the required code here. This entity has two properties, ID and method, and then I need one interface for this entity. And this time I use interface and call it iPayment method repository. And just I add one method for get the data from the database or from the static repository. And then I create one static repository for this entity. I call it a static payment method repository. And it is implemented from iPayment method repository. And I can add its method with control period key. Also, I will add some static data to this repository. And also through this method, I return this list of payment method. And in new version of C#, I can simplify this piece of code, and you don't need to add again the type of object that you want to create. And after new, I can open and close parentheses. And let me save the project. Now I have one entity, which is payment method, and one interface, and one repository for this purpose. Now I should register these interface and repository inside my startup class. And now I can add this new repository and interface here. And I have iPayment method repository and also a static payment repository. And now I can use this repository, a static repository, inside my controller. In next step, I should modify cost model and cost entity and also create CostViewModel. In cost model, I should add a payment method to store payment method of each cost. And also in create cost view model, the view model that I want to pass to the view, I should add list of payment method and also default payment method that I need. Let's flip to Visual Studio to modify cost model and create cost view model. Here is cost model, and I should add a payment method to this model. Now I added payment method to cost model and cost entity. And next step is modifying create cost view model and add payment method and list of payment method to that view model. And as you can see, the namespace of payment method is not available in this view model, and I can add it with control period. And now I have required properties in my cost model and in create cost view model. And the next step is modifying action method and controller that I want, which is CostController. And first I should add iPayment repository to my controller to be accessible through all the action method. And then I should modify the object that I created from create cost view model and add the payment methods that I have in my static repository. And also I can add one of the payment method as a default one. Let's back to Visual Studio and do the required changes. First, I should add iPayment method repository here to use its repository. And also with control period key, I can create its private object. Also, I should change this payment method repository as a public interface to be accessible through the controller. As you can see, by make it public, the error is disappeared from here. And now inside my action method, create a strongly typed view. I add the data that I want to pass to my view. The first one is the payment methods, which should be included the list of payment method that I need. And for catching this data, I should use payment method repository and get all methods. And also I can add one payment method as a default one. For example, I choose one, and as you can see in a static payment method, number one is the cash. Let me save it. And the next step is the view. And first I replace BeginForm HTML helper with the form HTML tag, and also then I use RadioButtonFor for creating my radio buttons. And here I using block of code, and inside the using block of code I use HTML.BeginForm, and it has several versions of overloaded. I will use this overload of BeginForms, which include action name, controller name, form method, and also HTML attribute. The action method names is create a strongly typed view, and the controller name is cost. And I use post as a form method, and then I use HTML attribute for use the required classes for my form tag. And as I mentioned, as class is reserved keyword, I should use @symbol. And then inside that one, I can use these classes that I used. Just bear in mind the classes are related to Bootstrap, and if you are not familiar with Bootstrap, you can review the classes in getbootstrap.com website. And now I move all the form elements to this block of code, and I remove form HTML tag and replace it with BeginForm HTML helper. Next step is adding the required radio buttons. You remember I passed the list of payment method to this view with my view model, and now I use that view model property to make my radio buttons, and I use a div element, and inside that div element I use for each loop because I should have access to all the payment methods which are stored in payment methods property of this view model. And I use var keyword, and I use the model dot payment methods, and then inside the block of code of this loop I use RadioButtonFor HTML helper, and here I again use lambda expression, and this one is related to payment method. And as each time we reach the for each loop, we have one of the payment methods in PM variable, and that's why we use a PM variable for the value and also for the label. I use ID as value of this radio button, and also I use this variable again dot method for the label of each radio button. Let's save the project and run the project once more with the changes that I have implemented. And then go to Cost, create a strongly typed view. And now you can see I have my radio button here, but it doesn't have a proper style, but I will add the style to this radio button. And also, as you can see, the radio buttons are in horizontal direction, and I can change the direction of the radio buttons by adding break line tag after each radio button. Let's back to Visual Studio. And before adding the styles, I try to add a break line after each radio button and see the result. Let me save it and run the project once more. And again, go to Cost, create a strongly typed view, and you can see I change it to the direction that I want. And let me refresh the page, and as you can see, cash is the predefined items in this list, but I want to add one label in above of this list, and also I want to add HTML attribute to these radio buttons. For the changes that I mentioned, first I use one label HTML helper with the text that I want in the above of this loop, and also I delete this breakpoint from here, and here I can add my HTML attribute that I need. And again I use one more Bootstrap class to make this radio button more stylish. And also based on Bootstrap instruction and samples, I should wrap these radio buttons inside a div, and the div should have class of form check. Thus, for make them more stylish, I use another div element and one more Bootstrap class, which is form check. And let me save it and run the project once more to see the changes. And go to CostController and create a strongly typed view action method, and you can see I have now radio button more stylish. And also I can change the predefined option, payment method option here with the changes that I can make inside the action method. Let's flip back to Visual Studio and to the controller. Now I use payment method 3 as a default one, and as you can see inside this one, the 3 is debit card. Let's save it and run the project and go to the cost strongly typed view. And as you can see, this time debit card is predefined one. We can check its view page source, and you can see I have input with type of radio, with the proper label, with just one line of code and for each loop. These are the topics that I wanted to describe in this session. Create one more entity for payment method and its interface and repository, and then add this service to a startup class. And in next step, I use this repository inside my controller to catch the data from the repository, and then I use BeginForm inside my view and RadioButtonFor for making the radio buttons. Thank you for watching us. Don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel and also follow us on our social media. Text version of this session is available in description of this video and also in our website. Once more, thank you for being with us.